Good morning. I'm Kim Romero with Owen-Dunn Insurance Services. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Our presenter this morning is David Finneran, Senior Executive with Insight Worldwide. David and his team consult with employers nationally to develop accuracies in hiring and how to effectively use pre-employment behavioral assessments. We first learned about Insight and their integrity assessment hiring tool at a risk control workshop. Attendees were impressed by the program's positive effect on hiring outcomes. So we asked David to share with us today. Thank you in advance for your participation. We believe your time will be well spent. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to David.
Hey, thank you. And good morning and welcome to everybody who is attending this morning's presentation. While we typically love to be able to do this in person, just because of the opportunity to engage with you and discuss the tools, just simply through a webinar delivery, we're still going to be able to cover some great features this morning on just providing education behind what is integrity testing and what is the truth behind integrity testing. So we hope you'll be able to take some good knowledge away from this presentation and some of the key points that will be discussed this morning, everything from what type of questions go into integrity tests, what could you expect in terms of return on investment. Is it a legal tool that can be used, even legal in the state of California? And we'll help answer all of those pieces here this morning for you. Just from an administrative note, just to help kind of avoid distractions, we do have everybody who's attending in a listen-only mode, but we do want to hear from you. So as we go through the presentation today, if you have questions, comments, information, or follow-up pieces that you'd like to have addressed, please feel free to use that feature of your login on the GoToMeeting webinar. There's a series that you can see questions or chat. Go ahead and enter that information as we go. And Tanya, who also is with Insight Worldwide, will be monitoring those throughout today's presentation and can provide those, and we can answer those as we go. So again, thanks for joining, and we'll continue to begin. So what we want to cover today, and we really appreciated Owen-Dunn's invitation to present this information to you, is what is integrity testing, what does it identify, and what are some of the truths and backstory behind it. And very simply, integrity testing is a tool that really came about in the late 80s after the Polygraph Protection Act was passed. As you all probably know, you can't use a polygraph in your application process to find out information about applicants. But integrity testing came about as a tool for employers after that is both legal and valid in an employment process to identify things like honesty, dependability, trustworthiness, reliability, and even pro-social behaviors from applicants that create honest and reliable knowledge and information to employers that can help identify who are going to be good employees and what applicants should move forward in your interview process, as well as it will help identify specific poor behaviors, willingness to participate in bad behaviors like illegal drug use at work, or even that an applicant would admit to things like workers' compensation fraud and unsafe actions. Integrity testing is a proven and very reliable measure that can help employers find out that information early in a hiring process and use that to make wise decisions about their applicants. So, in helping to share with the group, what does that look like? How does that even come about? Will people actually admit that information to you? What organizations like Insight Worldwide provide with integrity testing is assessments that either use strictly overt and direct style questions, or also a combination of overt and covert style questions in an online survey to applicants at the time of application. As an applicant completes their application, they can be linked directly to this very short survey. And if using something like just overt or direct. These questions are very straightforward and get right to the principle of something like, would an individual steal from their employer if they felt that employer was mistreating them? And their answers back could be something like yes or no. It's a very straightforward response that really provides you a legal and credible standpoint of why you chose to move forward with an applicant or you didn't. Covert questions are often incorporated into applicant integrity surveys, not simply just to find out one specific area of risk, but they're designed to not trick an applicant, but identify through a pattern of questions and answers, is this individual at risk for something, say, like work ethic, moral behavior, conflict avoidance, or even situations like retention? Is this an individual who is going to stay with our organization long term? Or is this somebody that turns over quickly? The other major benefit with implementing things like covert questions into an applicant integrity survey is this often also allows an employer to follow up with behavioral-based questions that are presented to an applicant that help open lines of communication to avoid yes-no type responses, and then through that communication either identify, is there a higher risk that we should not move this individual forward, or this is somebody that we want to place, but maybe we need to place them in a different department under a certain manager that is best suited, and thus helping to improve our performance as an organization. Why this is so important? By using integrity surveys in an application process, one of the key things that the survey helps organizations to achieve is separating high performers from low performers. So very often, like even in a low-skilled environment, a minimum wage position, frontline situation, a low-skilled worker who is identified to be a high performer and moves forward and we select them, typically outproduces their peers who are low performers by as much as 38%. So these are things that integrity surveys and performance behavioral assessments can help an employer achieve and help them move forward those applicants who are going to be best suited for the job at hand. So what are two of the most important features of integrity assessments, and why specifically are they good use for employers to implement? There are two key pieces when considering integrity testing, and if this is something that you're doing now, that you would want to go back and ensure that your provider backs with their survey specifically. And this comes about through specific studies by industrial organizational psychologists to demonstrate that the integrity survey is reliable. And really from reliability, what we mean there is through the constant use of the tool, would an applicant consistently provide the same responses, both today and if they took it again in the future, as a simple overview. So if it does that, that is the first step. The second piece, which is most important though, is validity. And so if you're considering an integrity tool for your organization, this is a key component that must be incorporated with your tool. And that's really what we're looking for here is the return on your investment. The most important consideration is the evaluation, because this speaks to the appropriateness, meaningfulness, and usefulness of the tool in question. So if you're employing an integrity assessment, is the result predictive of what they're supposed to achieve? And thus, do they also improve future job performance? If you're not sure, if you're using a tool like this now, that's something that your tool accomplishes, always go back and discuss that with your provider. And so what makes a quality assessment too? The other key component behind integrity assessments and job behavioral assessments is always go in and look at, is it job relevant? Is this tool going to be specific for the type of placements I'm making? And thus helping to improve the effectiveness of that resource in your job placements. Lastly, the other key component of what makes a quality assessment is looking at the legality. One of the things that our organization ensures and strives for continuously is to have all questions and response information reviewed by third-party labor attorneys, both for state and federal compliance. So basically, you need to ask yourself, can I ask this question in my state, and can I ask this question for my job placements, and can I use those responses provided by an applicant to make a hiring decision? Something like integrity testing is legal, and is legal also in the state of California, and has been used for close to 20 years. So just for everyone on the call, who uses integrity testing, and is this something that's important, and does this apply to my organization? So just simply as an example of some of those known employers who use integrity testing in their hiring assessment are listed here. And so it's appropriate, not just for somebody who's hiring, say, in construction, but also for those in manufacturing, hospitality, logistics, transportation, etc. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. Let's just take a well-documented case from AT&T. AT&T, their human resources department had a conversation in recent time about why they employed integrity testing for individuals working in their storefronts. And one of those key pieces is that it's very easy for employees, particularly working with small components like mobile cell phones and the like, to pocket those devices and walk out of the store without notice. So integrity testing is a key piece for their process to help avoid employee theft from their organization and their retail stores. Other organizations too, we'll take for example JELD-WEN, Windows and Doors. JELD-WEN Windows and Doors is one of the largest window and door manufacturers. A key component as their risk department identified was this helped to cut down not just on theft or absenteeism type concerns, but it significantly reduced unsafe and fraudulent claims by employees nationally. And so simply put, by using an integrity test that asked applicants, would you commit workers' compensation fraud, or have you committed workers' compensation fraud? They were able to identify that, and over the course of 10 years, they not only won a award for reduction in claims and improvement in safety factors, but it, over the course of time, saved them over $50 million in workers' comp claims. So let's just take a moment, too, to kind of step back and say, well, when is it appropriate to use or implement an integrity assessment in a hiring process, and who should receive it? So one of the key components is integrity testing is constructed and validated for the pre-employment process only. This isn't a tool that should be employed with current employees or those post-offer. And a key component of that as well is if you're using either an integrity assessment or really any other hiring tool, is to always do it consistently and fairly and equally to applicants in the same place of your hiring process. With an integrity test, that's something that can also really create knowledge early. So this is intended even as a best practice to use at the time of application or to be integrated with your online applicant tracking systems. The direct admission back from applicants early will help you in your immediate ROI of avoiding things like interviewing applicants who would admit to illegal drug use at work. It will help avoid excess cost to things like urine analysis for drug testing, and it will help avoid things like running background checks or references that anymore is getting more and more difficult to achieve. This helps not just maximize your ROI in the hiring process, but will maximize your ROI long-term for performance and the reduction of undesirable incidences. And where can you do that? Well, integrity testing, over the course of many years and through the use of millions and millions of applicants, has been identified that it can be conducted both in an office setting, say like if somebody comes in and applies, sit them down at a laptop, desktop, or even, on a mobile device, a tablet or a phone. And it can also be integrated with your applicant tracking systems, or today's technologies also allow for testing to be conducted via text message or email directly to an applicant's phone. The continued use of this also demonstrates that there really is no inconsistency of the type of results and information of capture or gain from whether an employee is on site or whether they're off site. The information comes back reliably and can be used again in that process to help determine should this applicant move forward in my process or not. And if we're using this and we send an integrity assessment to an applicant, how long should we suspect that assessment takes? Well, this is kind of a variable question, which comes down to really how many questions you're using in a pre-employment survey. But something like, say, an over-integrity questionnaire with between 30 to 44 questions would really take an applicant anywhere from about 6 minutes to 9 minutes to complete. And once they are complete, those results are always immediate back to an employer for decision-making needs. Something longer, say like a 77 questionnaire, which may incorporate both overt and those covert questions we discussed earlier, should take an applicant a little bit longer, but really only about 12 to 15 minutes in terms of completion time. Another real key component to that as well is, will applicants actually complete an integrity assessment if sent to them? And with our organization, we conduct over 1 million applicant assessments annually. We see even with remote employees, the opt-out rate is typically less than 5%. So this is a tool that is very effective not only in getting that information back, but it's a very effective tool at engaging the applicant and having them self-report through a completed assessment. Now, as those results come back to you, you might be asking yourself this as well, as, well, if they admit, for example, that they would conduct work comp fraud, or that they would steal from me, or that they would be unsafe, how do I address that with them, and what do I do with those? Well, simply put, it's just like, the process that you would to excuse any applicant in your process. The applicant doesn't see the results from their survey. That's for your internal use. But you can address it simply as, we appreciate you applying. We've received all the information we need at this time. Due to the large number of applications we do receive, we don't disclose at this point why an individual won't move forward. But you're always welcome to reapply, and if you don't hear from us within 12 months, please feel invited to come back and reapply at that time. As you do so, always remember that it's important to document your work, and whether your tool does this now, or something like Insights tools, that information that's gained is always tracked and stored in a secured area, so you can always answer any type of questions down the road. Now, one of the really key important pieces here is, and this might be going through your mind, is if I'm an applicant and I'm applying to organization, say ABC company, why am I going to tell that company that I do drugs, or I would hit a coworker, or I would not be a dependable individual long term? Well, this comes down to the concept of cognitive dissonance. And so what industrial organizational psychologists have been able to demonstrate over the course of time and through large amounts of validation studies and focus groups is individuals who admit to this behavior, they no longer view that behavior as abnormal or unacceptable. Simply put, they're adjusting that belief system to justify the behavior as normal. Let's look at a classic example. Classic example is, I know that stealing is wrong, but I steal. Well, why do you steal? Well, I steal because everybody steals to get what they want, right? And no, obviously that's not the case. All of you who are on this call today, that's not something that I'm assuming you participate in. That's not the values you hold. You would not be the individual to admit to one of these questions. However, what we do know through data and tracking is, particularly let's take, for example, a light industrial workforce. A light industrial workforce for areas overall in violence, workers' compensation fraud, employee theft, illegal drug use, absenteeism, 10 to 12% of applicants on average admit to that employer at the time of application that they are participating in one of those undesirable behaviors. That's 10 to 12% that right up front you'd be able to save yourself a lot of time, resources, and expenses in avoiding, but also to create a positive balance with today's applicant availability. It is challenging, but it's not there to screen out a large amount of your applicant pool, but really to identify this is the individual that is going to drive up costs. This is the individual that is going to have a litigation or an unsafe action that we can't avoid. And so just to give everybody an example of what some of those questions are and what applicants actually admit to, we'll start with the first one, a violent question, which what we know through insurance studies, particularly with, say, temporary staffing, is this is a violent claim is typically the lowest on average in terms of number of claims that they process annually, but it is the highest in terms of severity. And so simply by avoiding somebody who is going to have that behavior, like hitting, pushing, shoving, to avoid problems or to answer problems as other employees, what we see is 1.16 on average, or 1 to 2 applicants out of 100 admit that they would be violent or have been violent with other employees. Let's take drugs next. This question is, how often do you currently use illegal drugs, other than marijuana, at work or just before going to work? The admission rate for drug use or illegal drug use on integrity testing is an important piece because it's actually proven to be more statistically valid than a urine analysis test. So on average, 6.7% of applicants who take an integrity test and applying to an employer admit to their illegal drug activity. And that's even for things like cocaine, heroin use, methamphetamines, that they can't pass a drug test today. And so the average for urine analysis, average nationally is typically 4.2%. So by employing a tool at 6.7%, you can be more effective at screening your applicants for those high-risk behaviors. Lastly, the one that everybody always wants to know about is, how can I avoid fraud? And for example, an integrity test, again, in that temporary or that light industrial workforce area, typically we see 2 to 3 applicants out of 100 that actually admit that they have faked a job-related injury or they have falsified a claim to an insurance company previously. Organizations in California have, by implementing this tool, have reported even if they were averaging 1 to 4 fraudulent claims a year, that by simply implementing the integrity testing tool, it has taken them down to 0 to 1 claims that they fought or had to investigate annually. So a very simple tool answering a very big problem. And so we'll look at that next, just in terms of some ROI, and if you're using a tool like integrity testing, what it might be able to achieve for your organization. And before we get to looking at some specific graphs and studies, again, we want to come back to also say, so if I'm employing the tool, is it going to screen out all of my applicant pool? No. How much could I expect that it might screen out? Well, a study of one manufacturing and light industrial temporary staffing organization out of the southeast area of the United States that averages over 19,000 applicants a year demonstrated in 2018 that it really only was screening about 9.5% of applicants. So we wanted to continue moving that 89 to 90% of their applicant pool forward, but for those high-risk areas, it helped to screen out. And from a productivity standpoint, their organization, represented there on the left, actually, on the right, improved hours performed by 17%. So one of the things that recruiters and hiring managers were fearful of, not just of losing applicants, but would it impact their performance? No, it did not. They actually improved their performance overall. Now to take a step forward and look at something like a workers' comp study. This study that's being presented to you in front of you is from an organization out of the northeast sector of the U.S. And what this organization found, and the reason that they implemented integrity testing, was that they had a high frequency of claims and high incurred costs from workers' comp annually from 2015 to 2016. At the end of 2016, they were prepared to enter the state at-risk pool, and one of the measures that their insurance broker recommended was to implement integrity testing in their application process to screen applicants. Within the first year of use, what the integrity testing helped them do was not only reduce incidences, but it also helped to reduce the average cost per claim. Thus, they avoided the at-risk pool, and in the subsequent year, moving into 2018, they were able to reduce insurance costs by over $80,000. End of 2018, they continued use of integrity testing to screen 12% of their applicants out of the application process, further help them reduce the number of claims annually. And we say, that's great. That looks really good, from a short-term study, great successes. But what about something larger? What about something long-term? So we go to this example here, and we look at this. This comes from one of the nation's largest light industrial staffing organizations in the United States. As an example of what integrity testing helped them achieve is between 2004 to 2007, when integrity testing was still relatively new, they began with a trial phase and began across the nation working with branch locations that volunteered to use the integrity testing in their application process and to see what it would turn up. What they identified early and almost immediately was every branch that began implementing the integrity testing immediately began to see a drop in their workers' comp incident rates. Through that continued trial and the continued adding of branches over 3 years, they found such an impact that by 2008, it became a requirement that all locations nationally implement integrity testing. By doing this, they saw a continued substantial decrease in claims annually and achieved their goal of less than 9 incidents annually by 2010. And we go back and we say, well, were there other impacts within that? And we jump forward to 2014 where we see a jump. And we say, well, why? What took place during that time frame? Well, this organization in 2014 acquired a large firm that didn't do integrity testing and had high claim rates. In acquiring that firm, one of their requirements was that all new branches again implement integrity testing. And by 2015, they again achieved their goal of reduced incidences, but they also found through tracking that it was saving them more than $1.4 million annually in drug and background checks. Now, in recent years, there's also been some changes. So in 2016, where we see claims being the fewest, we say, well, what happened there? In 2016, the organization actually added to the length of their assessment and was more effective at screening out. But then they also took a step in 2017 as applicant numbers began to decrease and said, we will accept some more risk by implementing a shorter assessment. But as soon as that shorter assessment was implemented, the claim rates did creep up slightly. Overall, though, in the course of 15 plus years, this organization, through continued use of integrity testing and maintaining it as the single most consistent piece of their hiring process, was able to reduce claims by over 50%. So as we begin to wrap things up now, what we want to leave you with is these are some questions that if you're considering integrity testing or maybe you're using it now, these are questions that you would always want to ask a provider and to make sure that it's appropriate for your organization. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time and thank each of you for setting some time aside today to join this webinar. I'll go ahead and if there's no questions, Tanya, from the group, we'll turn things back to Kim and Kristen.
No question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, David and Tanya. If anybody is interested in more information or has questions, please feel free to reach out to David directly. We have his contact information we can share with anyone who's interested. And also, you can just call me directly. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you, Kim. Take care, all.